And is that's under open?
Under open.
Yeah.
Sorry, so the FTE is 4.6, is that?
Where's FTE? Oh, that's 4.6.
Sure, make that 4.6, and the core thing will make that 4.7.
And capital funding results are already in the package? No.
They're already in the package. We just got a replacement page.
Is that general fund capital?
Yeah,
Is that
the
general
replacement
fund
page for
capital?
page
Yeah.
9, there's a couple of typos on it, so if you got the single
That's
page,
fine.
that's just a subby page, that's all.
Yep.
Okay, with all that, is everybody happy with the agenda?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I assume the agenda's been approved, et cetera. Steph can put any two names down she wants, who moved and seconded. We've got minutes. We've got a meeting.
May 1st.
May 1st.
Can I remember that program?
I can't remember what I had for breakfast some days. So, any errors or omissions,
No, I can move that.
comments? Don't like the way Steph wrote them? Fred just moved, I think. Your hand
I
went
did.
up first.
I did.
Michael seconder. All those in favor? Aye. Minutes are approved. Where can I go now? The general funding, we should probably save that one for when Rob comes. Why don't we do 4.4 and 4.5? They're kind of like no-brainer. That's the schedule. I know we got a schedule here somewhere. I
Oh,
just
the
gotta-
asset management update and the
Yeah,
budget schedule?
yeah, we'll do those before Rob gets, just out of respect to him, and we'll just, where the heck did I see the schedule?
4.4 and 4.5. Oh, yeah,
I'm
I'm
trying to
thinking it's
find
in
it.
the package.
Yeah, I'm
That's a
having-
verbal report, 4.4.
So 4.4 is just a verbal report
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah.
So 4.4 is our asset management. We had a provision in our.
Can you just go back to the budget schedule for a second?
Sure.
Well, that's next, if you're going to do them in numerical order.
4.4.
Oh, okay, I'll do it that way. Yes, sir.
So we have this, in our council strategic initiatives, we basically had a provision to get started with asset management planning. So we've engaged a company called Asset Insights Management. The owner of that company is David Albrice, and he has started us on our asset management journey at the district here. He met with staff and he met with council, talked about asset management principles and practices and the importance of having an asset management policy. And just a little bit more about David Albrice himself. He is actually a professional and regional planner. His asset management credentials include him being a certified ISO 55001 assessor. He teaches courses in the International Association of for the International Association of Asset Management. And he's also a NAMS asset management planner. NAMS is North American basically an asset management association, originally founded out of Australia, well renowned across the globe for asset management. He's also a certified change manager, and he's got extensive experience in municipalities and asset management. So over the past 10 years, he's worked with Vancouver, Burnaby, District of North Vancouver, Grand Prairie, Mission, Cranbrook, Whitlam, Squamish, just to name a few. He was with a large engineering firm prior to taking on the engagement with us, and he is extremely passionate about asset management, and he recognizes that small municipalities like ours are at a deficit to having access to asset.
I'm just smiling, how do you get passionate
I
about
know.
that? I'm sorry,
Oxymoron.
staff do not mimic that.
It's a statement of the rest of your life.
Honestly, missing something, my life is not complete. I'm sorry, Raj, go ahead.
But basically, he recognized that, that small municipalities are at a disadvantage from a funding perspective from being able to have access to professional asset managers. So he is very, very excited to be working with us. He is actually right now working on phase 2 of our plan, which, so as I mentioned earlier, he's met with council, he's met with staff, he's gone through asset management data that we have in various sources. We had at one point acquired a asset management software piece called Insights. Basically, from my evaluation of the system, and I think he would agree, garbage in is garbage out.
Yeah, it's inside.
Asset finder.
Asset finder, sorry. Garbage in is garbage out. The information in that, there was information in that system, but it was not well organized. We didn't have good information. So he's taken information from our TCA databases, from Asset Finder, and also from the GIS system, and is comprehensively working with that data. And essentially, he had identified a preliminary funding deficit number, but again, that number is only as good as the data. So I've engaged him in phase 2, which is data cleansing. So he's going through our data and going through a data cleansing exercise. He's also been engaging with staff, and he's working through our risk framework, a level of service framework, helping, basically working on process mapping, and he'll be working on documented maintenance plans for our assets as we move through the journey. So that's kind of a
What's the price tag on this, Raj?
Right.
Did we get any provincial funding? I can't
Yes.
remember.
So we did have a provincial grant for $15,000, and then we had approved funding for the balance. We had about $42,000
In addition to the 15?
No, including the 15. And so he is under the 42 at present. I understand that there is another asset management planning grant available. The intake on that closes in the beginning of October. So I am going to be having a look at that and see if we qualify for that, and I'll apply for that as well, so we can continue.
So we might be
engaging
cost
on-
neutral on this thing from municipality? In terms of the study, I appreciate we got other costs down the road, but we may be cost neutral on this study, you think, give or take a couple of bucks?
No, because you can't get a grant to fund stuff you've already spent, so if we're up to the 40.
Oh,
Yeah.
so
Raj
the
could-
27 differential is out of us?
Yeah, that's on us,
Okay, I
exactly.
understand, okay.
So 2 questions. The software package we bought, is it of any use, or has he just thrown it
That
out?
software package is not of any use. It was
Okay.
actually quite pricey, and it had annual license fee.
Because
and
I
given
thought
that
that
we
was
weren't getting
recommended
this-
by Asset Management BC to use.
No, that wouldn't
but-
have been that.
Okay.
Actually, Asset Management BC and all of the asset management practices dictate getting to know the last step in a process should be acquiring an asset management software piece. The
Yeah.
first stage should be cleansing your data, getting to know your data, and given this a municipality that's the size of our municipality, we should be able to initially get that going using Excel modeling.
Yeah.
And then once we've got our Excel modeling and data and house in order, then we can take a look. Then we should be taking a look at a software piece. You shouldn't buy a software piece and have a software piece dictate how you do your asset management.
Raj, without putting an exact pin in it, because developing the system takes time, when do you think that we'll get an end of the study to know what our financial, I'm gonna call it liability might be in terms of replenishing our assets? if
Our
that's the
asset
right question.
reserves.
Yeah, reserve or whatever you wanna call it.
We should, in conjunction with our development of our 2020 budget, have a
Pretty good.
much stronger idea of what our funding deficit is and what our 20-year
Wow, that's
projection
that's
for
pretty cool.
capital spending will be.
Okay.
When he came to the committee of the whole, which, there was a whole PowerPoint presentation, so maybe we should ask Steph to send out the link to that particular, or if we've got, is the PowerPoint presentation in the agenda now? Yeah.
Probably, can you remember the date of it?
No, I can't remember.
So Raj, if
But that, you might just find it interesting to have a look at his
if I
PowerPoint
understand
presentation.
this right,
It's good.
although we might have some flexibility, it comes out, that could influence our future reserves that council may be asked to set aside.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes, of course it will.
They'll
Yeah,
try to
it'll-
define dollar amounts on it,
Yeah.
so this could be,
Mhm.
just like getting a depreciation study in a condo building, you never want one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Exactly.
Got it. All right, anything else regarding the asset management?
I just want to say, thank heavens, we're finally moving on it. We've only been talking about asset management for 3 to 4
Yeah, I was going to university when we
so-
started talking about it.
We weren't even a muni then.
Probably.
It has been a process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Raj, thanks for getting on top of that.
Yeah,
Already.
Okay, budget schedule.
That's page
You
26.
sent something out.
It's in your green
Timeline?
package,
Yeah,
page
in our
26.
package, we have a draft budget schedule for the 2020 budget. I'm kind of stalling as I get to it here.
Second to last page, Raj. Go to the very
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So, maybe I'll just walk through the schedule and then give you feedback. Again, this is just draft, but, essentially, I plan to,
You guys.
hi Rob.
Rob, I'll brief you in just a second here, just bear with us.
Plan to kick off the budget process in October, with a meeting with, divisional managers, to go over this timeline and get feedback from them in terms of information and the forms that we use in completing our budget. And essentially, we would be, having the staff and managers make their capital and operating updates.
Raj, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. So, Rob, just to bring you up to date, we just approved the minutes, and Raj also briefed us on the asset management system, which I understand the full council was briefed on anyway, so we just brought the rest up to date. And now we're on page 20 of this document, he's just going through the budget. 26, which is the budget schedule. Roger, page 26, sorry, Raj.
No worries, thank you. So the second line here gives staff about a month to go through the budget and put their new requests in to review capital, put capital requests forward. And it'll take about 10 days in finance to upload and analyze that information, and by that time, the preliminary tax roll information from BC Assessment will also be available. So we'll be able to do analysis during that period of time, and essentially, again, by the end of November, we'll have an idea of what type of tax rate will be required to balance the budget, because almost always our resources are limited in comparison to the anticipated increase in costs or requests. And so at that point, we'll also have staff working. This mandate profile key projects is essentially an update from staff on their divisional mandate and what they've done during the year. So staff members will be working on that in October as well. And then we'll, again in November, we'll review the preliminary budget with the CAO and managers. It's still at the staff level there to the end of November. And then we'll work on the budget, the preliminary budget book in December, and then in January, just shortly after the holidays, we'd like to bring the budget and the budget book back to the Finance Advisory Committee for your input. And a week later, we plan on having a council workshop with council. That would be before going out to public consultation and get council feedback. And then we'll go to the public for public consultation in February, essentially targeting for the first 3 readings of the financial plan towards the end of February and adoption beginning of March. Any questions? Yes.
Allison and Joyce.
I'm really happy to see earlier than later, so this is good. We're getting there. One of these days we'll get it, so we're at the first reading by the end of December.
The only problem with the first reading
Or-
at the
or
end
we've
of
got it ready
December
for
is we
first
don't get
reading.
a BC Assessment can make mistakes in their preliminary roll assessment, and so
I'm
they're.
not talking about the tax rate, I'm just talking about the budget.
Oh, the budget itself.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and the tax rate is part of the budget, right? Because that's our taxation revenue, so, that kind of is the
Yeah, but the
part of the
taxation-
equation that
You don't need
dictates
the
what our
tax
rate
roll.
tax increase will be.
Yeah,
And so, I mean, municipalities do adopt budgets in absence of the revised roll
No, I'm
coming in.
not talking about a doc, I'm just saying,
Or-
be at that final stage where the only thing that might cause a change might be a huge increase or decrease, but that would cause a huge tax increase, but we're moving in the right direction. So
Okay.
you, does the tax roll really come out at the end of November? I've always treated it as a Christmas present, and we get them at the end of December.
No, the preliminary roll from BC Assessment comes out in November, along with the preliminary new construction estimate.
And it
And
takes
then-
them a whole month to send the rest of us our individual notices then.
Yeah. And then, what is it that comes out in the beginning of January, Shale? What do they call the
Well, that's-
second?
It's the revised rule?
The revised comes out in March, I believe, doesn't it?
I
No,
thought
that's
that was
final, completed.
Yeah, the final, it's the complete, the revised is March, the completed is December, so they call it a completed roll. It should be 90% accurate, and that's the beginning of January. But the
Okay.
revised is the one that comes out in March.
Joyce, you have a question?
And one more. Have you left yourself enough time? You've got the budget book preparation ending by the end of December, and then you've got almost 3 weeks in January before it comes forward to the fact. But then 1 week later, it's going to council. So have you left yourself enough time from FAC input to council workshop to make any changes that you might want to make before it went to council?
Relevant point.
I believe I have, I believe we should be able to.
Because
incorporate
usually council meets on a Monday, so you've got to have the package ready
it. Okay,
the previous Monday, so I just didn't
Yeah.
think you'd left yourself enough time.
I'll review that piece of the
Unless, of course,
schedule
you're
to
planning
see
on
if I
not
need to
coming
adjust
back
that.
from vacation until,
Like, Steph, what you may
I
want
mean,
to
we could
do.
always try and have the FAC a little bit earlier, so it
That's what I
allows
was
us
gonna
a
say,
little
maybe
bit of time for the
Steph,
council.
poll the
to
members,
refresh.
what's the members of FAC like a few days before January 20th?
Yeah,
Maybe,
the,
yeah.
A few days before.
well, like
I
the
went
week
out,
before,
thank you.
and no later than the
Yeah,
20th.
yeah,
No,
so-
No, I mean, that's, maybe some of us are away, I don't know, I'm speaking personally, I am,
Yeah, well, when do you go?
the end of December,
Oh, okay, well, you're out of commission then,
Yeah.
for the whole month of January.
yeah.
Yeah.
Joyce, you have a
Okay.
question?
Where does the council strategic planning session fit in with this, and how does it impact?
Good point.
I haven't got it in here, but we had a council, we had plans for council strategic planning session in we're already at the end of September, just about end of September, beginning of October. So I'll have to touch base with Kathy on that, given the circumstances that we're currently facing, we'll have to visit that.
We have a meeting that's currently scheduled with this group on November the 3rd. What would you foresee would be on the agenda? None of the budget stuff would be on there, you're still plugging
It
away
would be a
here?
little bit early for me to have budget stuff by
So
then.
what would be, just, I'm putting you on the spot here a bit, what do we normally talk about at that November meeting? Just refresh my memory here.
I
Budget principles?
We could talk about budget, or we could defer that, I mean, I'll have a look. Actually, I don't think I'll have a lot to talk about, because we're covering off a lot
Why don't we
in this
today just
meeting.
say the November 3rd
So-
meeting may get canceled? I mean, we can still keep it penciled in, but it may not
Yeah,
happen.
Or is it something
because-
that you'd want to do in December? Perhaps,
Yeah.
like,
Yep,
I'm thinking of things like, budget assumptions, like we'll assume same number of staff, 2.5% inflation rate,
so the budget
Right.
assumptions,
right,
yeah.
why don't you just take
Yeah.
our advisement whether there is some stuff you want the 3rd, or Fred's thought that we have the meeting later, maybe in, sometime in December, or then
December.
Christmas Day or something.
Christmas Day.
no,
Can we leave that with you?
Yeah, why don't you leave that with me, that
We'll
was
see
great.
what happens. Okay, anything else regarding the budget preparation, folks?
no,
no,
Okay, just to help Rob out then, that was 4.4 and 4.5, just thought that you could do those without your presence here. So let's go back to the original sequence here, so I'm on 4.1A. So this is page 7, how am I doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Page 7.
Page 7 of 28 of your agenda is the operating fund results for the period ending August 31st and incorporates a projection to the end of the year. So if you were to take a look down the two, I'm going to start with the high level and then I'll go into details. So at the end of 2019, we are projecting an excess of $275,000 of revenues over expenditures. So we're anticipating an operating surplus of about $275,000 in the general fund. The individual components are basically items that will contribute to that. So now I'll kind of walk down through the revenue items here. Taxation revenue is essentially forecast to be on budget. We collected all of our taxation revenue, or received almost all of our taxation revenue for 2000.
So how much is sitting unpaid? compared to
I
previous
didn't
years?
take a look at that for the purposes of this report. We recognized the entire revenue for.
No, I know that, but I'm just thinking,
Jill,
what's
do
the
you recall how
receivable?
much you?
I don't, I've been focused on the delinquent taxes, which I'm happy to say are all paid
Yes.
now, and I have not.
The
been
3-year
looking.
job.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
I don't have the number off the top of my head for what is current outstanding.
It would just be interesting, I guess, to know if that's gone up, and the other interesting statistic is how many people claimed the homeowner grant and how much was deferred. It just gives us a feel about the, you know, general health and of the population and stuff like that.
I can look into those numbers.
Yeah.
So what was the first one, please?
How much has not been paid, like,
Thank you.
yeah, and then the two categories of deferred.
I think
Wait,
that
and
deferments were
homeowner
up
grant.
this year.
Hmm?
I think deferments were up this year.
Yeah.
Actually, we can, at the next finance committee meeting, we can bring you an update on the tax stats if that's desired.
How about the grants, what's happening with the grants?
So-
Making a fortune here.
So our grant revenues here are forecast to be about 150,000 favorable to budget, and there was earlier in the year an announcement by UBCM that the gas tax funds would be increased this year. We budgeted about $63,000, which is the amount we receive annually. This year we've received 99,000 and are expecting another 30 to the end of the year.
They don't.
So essentially, these gas tax funds are deposited to a reserve fund and are used as a funding source based on council approval. So they're essentially transferred to reserves as they're received.
Is that a flat amount, or does it vary with the price of gas? Excuse
No.
my stupidity here.
It's,
It has generally been a flat amount for the past several years of 63,000. And there was an announcement earlier in the year that they were distributing,
they doubled it on a one-time.
on a
thing.
one-time basis.
Okay.
So that's a campaign thing, when you're asking people, it's a federal government transfer,
Okay.
and it's out of their gas tax monies, but it's not directly related. But it would be nice to ask the people that are running for MP if they would support that larger amount in carrying on, not being a one-time thing. That's it.
Okay, keep going,
Okay.
Raj, unless there's questions.
Continuing on to user fees, then user fees are currently trending favorable to budget. Right now, they're at 79% of budget, whereas if they had been on target, essentially 8 out of 12 months, because we're looking at results for the end of August, would have represented 67%. So, that being said, the variance is primarily in the planning and development area. Some of it is due to recoverable expenses being higher than budgeted, but that being said, those will be offset by expenditures also being higher than budgeted. There was also a little bit more development activity in comparison to budget in terms of subdivision applications that have been processed during the year and the processing of development variance applications. Filming revenue was also slightly favorable to budget, which is reflected in the user fees. In terms of the donations, I apologize for the title there. Donations are a very small part of that revenue line item budget. It should say other revenue. And that line item includes things such as tax penalties, return on investment, donations, and amenity contributions. It's kind of a catch-all area for small bits and pieces of revenue. And this line item is tracking on budget and is essentially expected to be on budget at the end of the year. In terms of our expenditures by different service areas of the municipality, most are expected to come in at budget or marginally over budget, with the exception of the planning and development area. We're expecting to be a little bit favorable to budget due to vacancies. Planner left during the year, and we had a vacancy in the planner position for about 3 months. Parks and Environment is also, we have a vacancy there. What is Bonnie's position? Manager of Bylaws and Parks and Environment, sorry. Her position has been vacant during the year, so we have a favorable variance to budget salary savings there.
Yeah, most of the expenditures to me seem to be pretty much in line. The Parks and Environment one, where you've had a vacancy for a year, or potentially a year or longer, does that create stress on the system, or is that just, are we finding that position or
She's coming
that
back
role?
in the middle of October.
Yeah, she's back in the middle of October, and it has created some gaps and stress in certain areas.
So it has been.
So there has
Okay.
been, yeah, we are definitely missing expertise in certain areas with her absence.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go to Nepal or something.
Cambodia.
Cambodia.
Now, question.
And our debt and principal slightly favorable to variance is due to, we had anticipated that we would be making payments on the debt for the fire hall. And we're not servicing that debt because we haven't basically drawn on the approved borrowed funds there. So that in a nutshell is the update on operating results to the end of the year. Any questions on that before I move over to capital?
Okay, just one. I mean, this is, in terms of vis-a-vis the budget, I would say this is good news.
Yeah.
If I just look at the projected amount, the 7,853, I'll pitch you on the spike, Raj. What would that number have been roughly the year before? You got that number?
In comparison to the 275? Sorry,
No,
which
no,
number?
I'm saying, we
7,853.
expect our operating expenditures this year to be 7,853,000.
Oh, okay.
Last year.
And where would that, I mean, vis-a-vis budget, it looks good. Okay, everybody's doing a good job. I'm just wondering, the year-over-year increase, what would that number have been the year before? I should have
can
called
get
you ahead of time.
yeah, I can't answer that off the top of my head, but I can definitely get back to you.
Can you maybe send out a quick email as a follow-up?
Yeah.
That's another relevant, I'm not saying it's good or bad, I honestly don't know. All right, want to go to the capital then?
Actually, you know what I can do, if you have just a quick sec, I can call up last year's projection and tell you what the projected number was.
I'll tell you what, if it's less than 5%, you can tell us, if not, don't tell us.
Give me just a quick sec here. 2018. The operating one. So the projection.
Well, on the,
Projection was almost,
the year-end
I will get
financial,
back to you
I got
by
the
email.
financial statements here, Raj, and it was 7.8.
7.8.
But that included 982 and 330,000 of water and sewer system.
Water and sewer.
We gotta take $1.2 million.
So if I just take a look at
Yeah.
the operating, I'd have to take a look at why there was a difference. It was
All right, let's
6.7 million.
let's
Yeah.
Forecast at the end of the year,
Yes,
so
I just thought it was an interesting
difference.
number, that was all.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to capital. There's a one-page handout because Raj picked up some typos on the
Yeah.
mailed out version.
All right.
So please refer to the one page and ignore the other one.
Okay.
So again, what I've done is organize this schedule by our major asset classes, our major asset classes exactly. So essentially, we're expecting to spend $957,000 less than what's been approved this year. Some of that will be carried forward, and some of that will be returned to reserves. So what we do is we actually take money out of reserves for funding our projects, and then at the end of the year, as those projects have come in favorable to budget, the money gets returned to reserves. For those projects which were not started during the year, we'll return the funding to reserves, and those projects have to be requested again so that council can look at them in priority of the current year's needs. So in terms of our transportation infrastructure area, significant projects in that include the Cardina Road widening, road resurfacing, and the multi-use path. The Cardina Road widening is expected to complete by the end of the year. And roads resurfacing, we've currently spent about, I want to say, close to $300,000, but there are other road works projected before the end of the year, and that should be, I've anticipated it will be fully spent. The multi-use path, which has a budget of $335,000, has been deferred to 2020. It was largely funded through grant funding, and when the tenders came in for this project, they were double what the project is. So, and the funding would have had to have come from municipal sources. So council's instructed staff to go back and review and come back to council later with this project. Once they found alternatives.
Is that October when that's gonna be coming back to council, I think?
I believe so.
Is that your question?
Yeah, just a quick question on fire trucks and things like that. We had quite a bit of discussion last year about insurance certification and the age of our equipment. By deferral and the things that have happened right now, do we have any potential issues in that regard? I'm talking about the,
Yeah, and that's in the major equipment provision, so.
That's right.
Okay, let me just talk about the major equipment, and then I'm gonna come back to your
Okay.
question. So, in terms of our major equipment provision here, the $100,000 that you're seeing the projected variance to budget is essentially for the provision for the fire truck that is currently in the budget. There's been no movement on the replacement of that truck in 2019, and that's primarily been due to the change
I understand.
in staffing with the new fire chief.
Mhm.
In terms of your question about implications of not replacing the truck, my understanding is part of our FUS certification is based on or our rating is based on the age of our equipment, and not replacing our larger truck, which has a 500,000-ish replacement cost implication with it, could impact our FUS rating. So it's something I will be discussing with our fire chief and looking into.
Okay. So no, it was one we did talk about a fair bit.
We did
last
talk
year.
about it in these meetings, and during the budget, one, we didn't have the funding, and two, at that time, also, the previous fire chief basically was not in a position to be looking at replacing it at that time.
I would think for 500,000, a key question is would or could?
Yeah, would or could, and the new fire chief has some ideas on different types
Okay.
of equipment that could be used on the island that may be more cost efficient, and basically, I'm also looking into acquiring used equipment in contrast to new equipment. So those are discussions that we'll be having during the budget process for 2020.
What was in the budget was the little truck,
It was a little,
Little truck.
that's
not the
right,
big
engine
532,
32.
it was
one,
good.
little
The other was
100,000
intended.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's an
that's-
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else on the capital?
That's good.
Okay, I'm gonna go to 4.2, which is tax exemption policy.
So this, let me just go to my agenda.
Page 10.
So I wrote a report on the permissive tax exemptions to council, essentially.
She's long gone, I gotta talk to her for a second.
Policies attached.
It's page
Did I
22.
include the report?
Page, oh, I got page 10, what are we?
Page 10.
Oh, sorry. I thought-
Permissive tax exemption.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, page 10 is the policy, not the, there was a report on permissive tax exemptions that was supposed to be in the agenda package.
Oh, I remember reading it.
It's page 22.
Page
Sorry?
22.
Oh, page 22, thanks, Joe.
Is it?
Oh, there we go.
It's just out of order.
So,
No, it's there. We
So
just have
maybe
to
I'll come,
read
maybe
the
I'll just go
policy.
over some of the highlights of the report as we're going through here, so.
The chairman apologizes.
Page 22.
So I haven't attached the bylaw here, but essentially I've got a copy of the report that will be going to council. So, permissive tax exemptions, essentially there's two types of exemptions from taxation. There's statutory exemptions and permissive tax exemptions. And permissive tax exemptions basically are not granted automatically. They must be approved, they must be applied for a specified period of time, and they're only available to nonprofit organizations on certain types of properties. So we received permissive tax exemption applications and requests from organizations back in, was it the end of July?
They were due by June 30th.
By June 30th. So June 30th was the deadline to receive them. We've reviewed the permissive tax exemptions. We have requests. We have a summary on page 25 of your schedule, which estimates the benefit of municipal tax exemptions to these organizations. Essentially, we will be providing about $50,000 in municipal tax exemptions if council were to approve these tax exemptions. There's no new organizations on this list from the previous go-around. What else can I say here? Essentially, when you exempt properties from taxation, you're not reducing the amount of tax you collect, you're shifting the tax, so you're shifting the tax burden from these organizations to the remaining taxpayers on Bowen Island. So essentially what this is saying is if this is consistent with the previous year and it had been 50,000, this is $50,000 of taxes that would have been collected from these organizations that has been exempted and is now collected from the remaining taxpayer pot on Bowen Island.
And if the actual assessed values come in that creates a higher number, then these numbers will change to match that number, right? It's not that this is the absolute amount that's going to be.
No, this is an estimate.
Yeah,
Yes.
question, please. I guess my main question is, what additional requests do we expect to receive over the course of the next year? I can see this number jump fairly dramatically. I think you're looking potentially at the Birch Society, which on the website says they're going to be asking for tax exemption. I'm assuming perhaps that maybe the medical clinic will be asking for it. There may be others, organizations that come out because of that. The more this becomes public information, the more people are going to be asking. And I guess my question is, the 1.5% cap, which is identified, is that a firm position, and are there others that we would anticipate? I mean, whether we're receptive to them or not is the second part of the question, but we can probably expect there will be an increasing demand or request for these types of exceptions, which will flow back, as you said, to the other property owners on the island. So there could be some significant numbers there. I don't know if you've got any wind of that yet, but I got to suggest you're going to probably see it.
Oh, they both said they would be applying.
They would be,
And
yeah.
there's substantial asset values attached to those, potentially.
Yeah.
I
How
guess
close
for
are
the-
we, how close are we on the 1.5%?
Where are we at?
Yeah.
You're at 0.7, I think.
So we're at, yeah, I have that in my report, so we're we're at about 0.7.
I got it, yep.
Yeah.
You're right,
Just-
yep.
Can I
Joyce?
just respond to Fred's comment about, there was a fair amount of public discussion when the policy was reviewed in 2014, I think it was. There was a lot of attendance at those meetings because it was the grants committee that was responsible for reviewing this. And a number of things happened where previously the residences that were attached to some of the properties were also exempt. And that's why you've got a formula in there, because it's really it was the interpretation of the grants committee that the tax exemption should be on the parts of the property for which the property is not for profit. So, and there, to my knowledge, no further applications came forward at that time, despite the fact that it was covered in the newspaper, there was a attendance discussion and so on. So, you're right, with that health center coming in place, that's an organization that's gonna be not-for-profit. Birch Housing will be not-for-profit, but for not-for-profits to have property is pretty tough for them to do, which is, and I could be wrong, but, I would expect that most not-for-profits end up leasing or renting, and that doesn't apply in this case.
And I think in accordance with our policy, if I'm not mistaken, Joyce, formula you had just described, the residential portion would not be
Not at all.
eligible for a
It was-
permissive tax exemption.
It was taken away.
So, yeah, it was, and that still stands in the policy, so out of those two organizations, for example, Birch probably would not qualify for a permissive tax exemption, given most of the property would be
Because
residential.
we own the land and we're leasing it to Birch for about a year or some nominal number, will that mean the land's gonna have diddly squat in value?
I can't say whether it'd be diddly squat for value, but even though a municipality owns the land, if the use of that land is for housing, I believe if it's not for municipal purposes,
Yeah.
then it will be added to the tax roll.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, because the lease was for such a nominal amount, whether they would look at that and value it as. The other one that's going to come on board will be Snug Cove House when they finally build.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
Snug Cove House right now is getting an exemption for their land, but we can't exempt bare land, so, unless it's got a use on it. So they're getting an offsetting grant for their land, so, which isn't covered off in this 1%.
No.
Alison, if we have a non-profit which meets certain criteria, is the fact that is their exemption automatic, or do we have to approve?
It's
No,
two
it's never automatic, they are at council's discretion.
And are these approvals reapproved annually?
No, these are for 5 years, so we don't
There
have
are
to go
five,
through
there's a
these.
5 year.
Or 4 years.
And
4 years.
do they
4 years.
all,
4 years.
they come up at the beginning of each council term?
Yeah.
So what we've
I
suggested,
remember.
what we've suggested in the report is that the permissive tax exemptions be awarded for a 4-year period, but these organizations be required to submit that they still qualify for a permissive tax exemption every year.
Which I think they were doing before.
Yeah, that's the same as this before.
Okay. And the cap is 1.5 and we're 0.7 at the moment,
And,
roughly.
That's
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
And we're not including the $2,000 or something that's not co-housed.
So,
Actually, Alison, if I could interject,
Yeah.
they did not apply this year.
Oh, they didn't?
No.
Oh, I wonder if they forgot.
So this is an update, you don't require a decision.
So
they're
what we
not
were
eligible for the
looking
permissive
for
tax
is a
exemption.
recommendation
But
from the
they're applying
finance
for the grant
committee
fee?
to council whether to award the permissive tax exemptions, shown in the report there.
People feel comfortable? There are issues, that stuff may come around.
I think things could come up, but I think for what we are dealing with right now, I think we're,
Yeah, and the other thing is too, every year there's a bit of a trigger on this thing, they gotta reapply and they can technically get,
Well, they won't reapply until 2023.
2023, that's correct.
At the end of the 4
But-
years.
in the case of Birch, who've said they're going to be requesting it, at least during the construction phase.
Well,
We're up to
they're
that
not
point?
eligible if they haven't got a functioning building or use.
Up
Then
front.
we have, yeah.
Okay, so contrary to the website, okay. All right.
That's why we're giving a grant.
okay, everybody feel comfortable recommending this to council?
Yeah, yeah.
So I would
So
say
moved.
that the Finance Advisory Committee recommend that council award the following organizations with permissive tax exemptions.
No, approve the tax exemption bylaw.
Tax exemption by, tax
Okay.
exemption by.
That
tax
council
exemption.
approve the permissive tax exemption bylaw
For the,
As recommended by staff, essentially.
as
that's
presented by staff at this
the
meeting.
finance committee.
Okay. Okay, the September.
Hey, Fred, did you move that? I'm picking on you here.
I'll move.
Well,
I'll second.
whatever you like.
All right, Fred and Allison. Sorry, Joyce, you got overruled.
I know, it's fine. I'll still vote in favor.
We'll save you.
Church on the bench for the next one.
Okay, I'm on 4-3. Why am I not finding my paperwork on
I
this?
don't have any paperwork on that either.
Well, I'm feeling better then.
I had a list of items
Sorry, what was it for?
for the financial plan. So I
All right, we are on number, financial plan. Oh, oh, it's not attached.
4.3,
Did you email
there was
it in?
an Excel
It looks like it's
list.
just been forgotten to link it, so I apologize.
If
I
you
will
could
get
bring it
right
up on
now.
the screen, we can go
Yeah, that'd be
through
good.
them.
Can you get it in the screen?
So-
Steph?
So while Steph is bringing that up, I have not
Have you
included,
printed stuff?
I don't believe I've
Thank you.
included anything other than what council has approved by resolution in the proposed financial plan amendment. I've just got a list of items to review with the finance committee. I haven't actually prepared the financial plan.
So while
even
we're
the
waiting
financial
for the
plan.
list, what's the timing you're looking at?
To do the amendment.
Yeah.
I would like to bring the amendment forward, I'm away next week, so not at the next council meeting, but at the subsequent one.
Do you want to do it that soon, given what's going on with Cardina and other things? I mean, I'm just thinking something else could come up between, rather than doing it at the beginning of December.
December is such a busy month with budget, I wanna get it done, and if I
Just don't
need
want
to
you
do
to have to
another one,
do it
there's nothing
twice.
stopping me from doing a second amendment. But I'd like to get the amended plan before council, so that it kind of alleviates my workload in December, January.
Sure.
Well, we can see whether we can read.
And Michelle's gonna bring a printed copy of it.
Maybe I'll just quickly go through each of the items here. So the first item here was CARET grant funds that were awarded, which council had instructed us to include or apply towards the bike barn for consideration of solar, looking at solar panels on the bike barn. I had forgotten to do that last year, so it's just a housekeeping item. Items 2 and 3 were approved by, was funding approved by council with 85,000 coming from the Community Works Reserve and 10,000 from the Roads Maintenance Reserve for the Cardina Road widening, where the tenders were in excess of the available budget. Item 4 here is a grant funding that was awarded during the year. So essentially, we're including the revenue from the grant funding and the associated expenditure. We also received and were approved for a rural dividend fund, which is funding a staffing position for an economic development officer. So we're recognizing the $98,900 in funding, and we'll set up the strategic initiative expenditure accordingly. And then items 6 down through to 10 are, I believe, all council strategic initiatives that were approved at a council strategic planning session. Some of which are funded through grants and others are funded through accumulated surplus. Essentially, even the energy step rebates was part of that.
So,
No, they're not. Actually, the energy step code rebates, we have grant funding. As people comply with, I believe, the step code, they will be eligible to receive a refund. So we have up to $12,000 to rebate back to developers or builders for being energy efficient and energy smart. We had a council resolution to increase funding provided to Tourism Bowen Island. We currently have a $15,000 provision in the budget. We're taking $5,000 from accumulated surplus and increasing that funding to $20,000 for 2019 only at this point in time. And then we had grant funds which were received from the Bowen Community Foundation for Birch. So it's an in and an out of our books. We received $15,000. We distributed them to Birch. In addition to that, council approved an additional $10,000 funding to Birch. So Birch received a total of $25,000 in funding through the municipality in 2019. Initiatives 11 and 12. Number 13, we're replacing asbestos cement water main in conjunction with the Credina Road widening in the Credina Road area. What we'll be doing is putting the underground piping and making it connection ready, so that if the current asbestos cement lines were to fail, all we have to do is connect the new ones up. Without having to dig up the road and put new lines in.
Gosh, that's a novel thought.
Pardon?
A very novel
oh,
thought.
yeah, like Vancouver and Penn Street every year, yeah.
So, and item number 14 is essentially, as you're all aware, there was a leak in a significant leak in the Blue Water water system, and so there is a $60,000 provision that was approved by council to make repairs to the water main and for slope stabilization of that water main. And then
Was that a one-off just because it was in conjunction with the road problem, Raj?
Yeah.
My question being, let me rephrase it. If there's additional upgrades being needed to the water system, there's no precedence here. You can claim this is because of the road.
My understanding in preparing this, this request of council was, it was old infrastructure that needed replacement. It had nothing to do with roads. The Blue Water Community's position at the meeting was it was a lack of road maintenance that caused this, and they should come from road maintenance. So I'll have ongoing discussions with
I don't have any problem with this.
here.
I just want to make sure that it's not a precedence, because normally the water system upgrades a la Cove Bay, as I understand it, are to the users.
Well, that's
to
why
the
it is,
users,
that's
and
why
that's
it's
what
coming
this
out of
is
the
here
Blue
as
Water
well.
Park
This is
Reserve.
coming out of the blue, oh, sorry, Steve, yeah, this is coming out of the Blue Water Reserve.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was different than what was presented
No.
at night. I know you
No.
presented
No.
some numbers at night.
Yeah,
I'll retract
this
all
has
my
been
comments.
approved, this has been approved out of Blue
I got
Water.
educated.
And so as far as I'm aware,
Yeah,
yeah,
cool.
it's a Blue Water part, yeah.
The chair approves it.
Okay. And then we have, what is item number 50? Oh, they're just small little housekeeping items, not even gonna talk about those two. And that's kind of everything that I plan on can we scroll down, Seth, have we got anything else?
50,000 for the
15?
sewer.
Oh, yes, thank you. Item number 17, again, is essentially additional funding that was required to complete the Snug Cove Sewer Facilities lift station. Normally, this funding would come out of the Snug Cove Sewer Reserve, but their reserve balance has been depleted. There is nothing in reserves in Snug Cove. They had a very small reserve balance to begin with. A lot of their reserve was depleted around the time I started with the municipality when we did that major sewer uplift station. What was that project called?
The Miller Road
The
expansion.
Miller Road expansion.
Yes.
We came significantly over budget on that, and we're looking for funding sources to fund the deficit. So essentially, we'll need to be taking a look at strategies to build up the Snug Cove sewer reserve balances. Currently, rates for Snug Cove sewer only cover operating expenses. There's really no provision building up their reserve balance.
But it's your opinion, we should be building.
We
up
should
those
be
reserve
building that up
balances.
and reviewing that, so again, I'll be having discussions with our manager of engineering,
So
present
Raj,
for.
to the degree that these are municipal expenditures, are they included in the data we had on page 7?
I did include them
So
in
these
the
are all
budget provisions that you
included,
have in the data, that's correct.
So these are in the projected
Again, in
area?
the projected, I've incorporated them in, that's why I didn't call it approved budget, I just called it a budget provision, so
Okay, so, but the, whatever that was,
those numbers are reflected in the operating statements that I
Yeah.
presented.
so the 98.9 is a revenue line, but it's also gonna be an expenditure line. But most of that revenue line is gonna be deferred revenue,
It'll be
right?
deferred, that's
Okay,
correct,
and
and
this-
the expenditure will be carried forward to
But the
the
expenditure
subsequent
will
year.
haul in the next year, and then the other one is the same for the housing needs assessment.
Yeah.
And,
Those council strategic initiatives, yeah. anything
yeah, that
that's
23,
unspent
one, the 15,000 for the housing needs, most of that's gonna be in
Be
deferred
carried
revenue
forward
too.
next year.
Okay, and, so because you said you're gonna take some of these out of accumulated surplus, you're not really gonna need to, because you've got a surplus in your budget projection.
Well, essentially, I will take them as a funding source for the purposes of completing this, and then they will work into the current year. I mean, if there is, yeah.
But you know you're gonna have enough accumulated surplus in the
Yeah,
current
so
year,
so on a net basis, we'll be contributing to surplus
Yeah,
this
but
year,
not
that's
to
correct.
confuse people, having a draw from surplus and a contribution to surplus. You can't just put them,
No, just to
Yeah.
keep things straight, Allison, I need to identify funding sources for expenditures
Yeah,
in
I
the
know.
current year, so I will be taking those out of the surplus and setting up the budget for them. But you will overall have a
Yeah.
contribution to surplus based on my anticipated results for this year.
yeah.
And the good thing, as you move on from period years, you'll get now that consistency of approach throughout. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go.
So, again, I guess, given that these have already been approved by council, I would still ask that the finance committee make a recommendation to council.
Telling them that they've done good?
Pardon? A recommendation or not a recommendation that these items be included in the
What if we
financial
take the
plan.
alternative approach?
I'll happily propose that as stated by Raj.
All right, we'll ask one of the other councillors to second it.
No, are you gonna second that? You
I'll second it.
There we go. That was a mutual party there.
I'm not sure about that procedure, but all those in favor, done. All right.
Okay.
So Rob, for your benefit, we added two things to the agenda here. 4.6 was the FTE count. We've got a sheet like that buried somewhere. And the second one is multi-year core funding. So why don't we go to the FTE? This was something that Raj was asked to prepare just to give us a feel of FTE staff changes on. So, and I know in fairness, Raj was asked to go back further, but because he wasn't here, he needed more time to get the exact data. But I think they're going to try and go back further, but this is sort of a short-term data.
So what I've got here, yes, I've basically provided the change in FTEs from 2017 to 2018, and then 2018 to 2019. And if I walk you through these, you'll recognize why it's so important to have explanations along with the change in FTEs, rather than just to provide numbers and FTEs change. So from 2017 to 2018, our FTEs changed by a total count of 3. Essentially, we had 1 new FTE approved in the planning and development area. And we also had we also basically had an addition of a planning assistant in that area as well. That was Tessa's position as she went to provide planning services there. And in the library, there was a 0.8 FTE, which was funded through taxation. Essentially, there was a approval of a position to manage the volunteers, if I recall correctly. And then there was a reallocation of a FTE between roads and the parks environment here. And we had a nominal 0.3 FTE change, likely due to reorganization within general government.
Raj, to put you on the spot, which may be unfair early in the budget, what's the thoughts around the building about next year's budget in terms of FTE additions? I know it's a little premature, but if I can put you on the spot a bit.
Where does Bonnie fit in this with her leave?
We never removed her as an
She's- so
FTE.
she's listed in the
so
FTE.
She's in
Yes.
maternity leave, she should stay in the calculation.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't gonna have an automatic one more.
No.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be an
Yeah.
increase in FTE. So at this point in time, I am not aware of any staff requests for new FTEs. Shale, have people been talking to you about potential?
I think that there's a lot of pressure on utilities, so perhaps that will come forward.
A lot of pressure, what?
With the
So-
utilities,
I mean, if I can, because I raised this issue, because I'm thumping at a couple of other organisations for bloat, and frankly for EFT growth that creeps in any organisation, and occasionally we need to draw a line and go back and say we're doing a zero-based budget and say, okay guys, no, we need to just do some fundamental rethinking. Thank you, Raj, for producing this. I would be extremely grateful if you could go back a few more years. We'll look at the explanations. I think we have enough history for long-term employees to provide some explanations. I've asked this because I am subject to, as other councillors are, like, why do you, all those people you have at the meeting, they're not necessarily well thought out comments, but I actually want to be in a position to be able to answer these things directly and forcefully. And quite honestly, if I don't believe in it, then this side of the fence here will know about it too. Because, as I said, it's something I'm majoring on with some other organisations we're involved in, saying, no, you just can't keep on growing the staffing.
Yeah.
Then there has to be some science at some point, or some technology which says, wait a minute, or some functions that we actually do which can be eliminated. That would be a hooray. And so a somewhat stentorian look at this over the years is something I'm advocating for, because we need to be clean on it. And if we have legitimate, and I'll tell you one, water, we've been talking water. One of the major things is having to read every water meter on this island. Right? with some of the challenges we have, we need to know about water consumption, who and where. Well, you've got to send someone around, but I don't know whether it's between 17 and 1900 properties, reading individual water units. No, maybe we need a Wi-Fi unit on each one, the same as we have on the electric meters, which gives the readings. I don't know the answer, but I appreciate the pressures. But I'm sorry, I think I really appreciate the work Raj is doing and others, so we can have a really scientific, good look. I don't want to throw anybody under the fire truck, but honestly, we need to be able to answer questions directly, and that's why, and I think the Finance Committee is the organization to drive this initiative.
I agree with you, Michael, but we definitely need to have explanations to those changes. So for example, when you take a look at the change in 2019, we went up by 0.9 of an FTE, but what we did is we did that within our existing resources. So some positions got paid a little bit less, others got paid a little bit more as we reorganized, and we were actually able to create an additional 0.9 FTE with existing financial resources in place without going to a tax rate increase to the public in that year. In other years, it'll be a combination of perhaps changes in levels of service, or I'm going to give you an example, and it might take quite a bit of work on Shale and other staff's part to find those numbers, because it's going to be things like we used to have, for example, recreational programmers that used to be paid in the accounts payable system, so they weren't considered to be FTEs.
They were contractors.
And then they got added to the FTE count, so we swapped the way we were paying them. But if we provided those numbers in the absence of context, people are going to say, your FTE count went up, the taxpayers are paying that much more, when the taxpayers were in fact paying that same amount. Or there may be the case where, like you talked about utilities. So for example, a lot of the water quality testing was being done by external contractors in the past, and now it's being done by our utility staff rather than external contractors. So there, I think we're going to have to talk to other staff within the organization, because we're not necessarily going to have the answers and be able to just come up with those explanations. So it may take a little, we may not have it at the next Finance Committee meeting, but we're certainly happy to start working on that and come back, because I do agree with you that, you know, we do need to provide that information.
So, Raj, Michael, I think in deference to using staff's time wisely, if you go through the annual report, you'll find the FTE information in each year's annual report.
Well, then, I'm going to ask her to do that. because-
Well,
Why can't you do that?
Well, because I'm asking, because I need to know, which may not be clear, and I'm not going to do it, and I'm asking this because I want it done with the same logic, the same hands on the keys here, so the number of reporting is consistent, even if it goes back 10 years. Not because someone pulls it out of a report, because if we have a contractor, which then becomes an EFTE, then for the purpose of this, when we're actually balancing our thing, we may say we will treat that contractor for the purpose of this exercise as an EFTE. It's the same to the taxpayer. And this is the sort of stuff we need to look at more in depth. And I'm sorry if it's extra work, but it's questions being asked of us, and it's questions we're going to have to answer. And it can only come from one unified source.
With all due respect.
Well, I think it is really important to take a look at how FTEs change over the years and where they come from. And it goes back to a question I had a long time ago, which has never been answered, but that is, at what point do we move contractors into being employees? Because it's not just a matter of salary, it's a matter of benefits, it's a matter of hours, it's a matter of all of those things. So it isn't just a matter of looking at FTEs, and having the explanation is critically important so that we can understand what our pattern is. If we don't have a policy on shifting from contractors to employees, it would provide us with a good baseline to look at how our decisions have been made in the past, so.
Thank you, and I mean, from my point, I have the 2015 numbers, I could have put them on this chart, but I will not give you numbers if I can't explain something.
Of course.
Fair enough.
And so that is why I did not put them on here.
No, we understand totally, and thank you for what you've done. And then let's move this forward.
So the other issue with, remembering in history with the contractors, there's an income, you know, CRA has a definition, and if you're telling them what they're gonna do, what hours they're gonna report and so forth, then they're employees. And you can't argue that they're contractors, and that was a situation with the building inspector, for example. And I think that became the same situation with some of the people that were running the rec programs. So it wasn't a choice of ours to choose whether they were gonna be FTEs or not, it was that was
I
CRA
think they're sorting that
legislation.
out with Uber in California as we speak.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
Good.
So is there an action on this?
Well,
Thank you.
yes,
So I
Well,
believe,
I think we received, correct me, Michael, if I misstate this, we received a preliminary report on FTE analysis, and the committee asked for some additional information. Will we leave it like that?
Yep.
Everybody happy with that? Okay. All right, the other item we added was multi-year core funding, and there's two documents here, one for tourism, Bowen Island, and one from Birch. Am I correct there, Raj?
yeah, just, I will again provide you with a brief overview. We've received 2 applications for multi-year core funding. As you mentioned, one is from Birch and one is from
Tourism Bowen Island.
Tourism Bowen Island. So essentially, we currently have a provision of $15,000 in the budget for Tourism Bowen. Combine these organizations, I'm not even looking at the report here, but I'm just kind of combined, they're looking for it's gonna cost an additional $50,000 a year if we choose to provide funding to these 2 organizations. The only funding source that I see for this is taxation, which means the taxpayers of Bowen Island will see a 1% increase in their tax rates to fund payment of these amounts to these organizations. The other option is, in the past, what we had done is we had combined the budget for smaller organizations, community grants, and so essentially and for multi-year core funding. And so once you take out right now there's 2 organizations that receive multi-year core funding. There's BIAC and, Museum and Archives and BIAC. So essentially, that leaves about $45,000 in funding available to small community organizations. They desperately need that funding. What I want to do is separate those 2 streams. So let's put BIAC and Museum and Archives into the multi-year core funding stream, leave the $45,000 that small organizations get, so that you're not robbing from Paul to give to Peter, so that those organizations which heavily rely on funding from us continue to receive the $45,000. Then it becomes a decision of if new organizations come forward and make requests for multi-year core funding, it becomes a decision, a recommendation of the Finance Advisory Committee and a subsequent decision of council whether to award that funding or not. And that way I kind of have a little bit more clear direction during the budget process on whether to include funding for these organizations in the upcoming budget.
So if I can just ask that, I'm sure I agree with you. Where does that just take these 2 organisations? Are you suggesting then that these amounts that they have to apply every year still?
The multi-year core funding policy gives them funding, is it for a 4-year period?
Yeah.
It's for a 4-year period, so they wouldn't be applying every year.
Okay.
They're asking for a guarantee, they're asking you to guarantee them funding for the next 4 years.
Fine, so that's encompassed in what, sorry, if I missed that bit, that's all. Yes, because they need to be able to make some form of plans and strategy, and we support that.
And your $50,000 increase is
That's net of the
net of the
15,000
50,
that's
yeah.
already
So
included
you've
in the
rounded
budget,
it up
yeah.
from 48 to 50.
Yeah,
And you're saying that's about a 1% increase?
Yeah.
that would be about a 1% tax rate.
Tax rate increase, that would, everybody pays for it, right?
I'm gonna open it up to the group for discussion.
I'd like to just make one comment if I can. Is I know we need more housing on here, but if we take the lost opportunity cost on the Birch land, I make that about $1 million at about 3.5% because we're gonna be borrowing. So that's about 140K. So municipality, as long as we're conscious, we're gonna have $250,000 in this project before the backhoe hits the ground. That's my only comment. As long as we're making a conscious decision of the full costing of this.
It's a good point. I've got comments on both proposals, so you want to do Birch first? Let's do Birch first.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, basically, we're looking at a request from around $10,000 per, in the current period, which was provided according to their, for a 6-month period. I don't think that was the case, it was probably
Well, by
for
the time
12
they
months.
got it, it probably
I know,
covered
but it's
it.
just part of their financial, to the point that they're requesting $100,000 basically over 4 years. And I'm looking at the, what the intent of the funding is for, and I look at it in the areas of their intention to have engaged consultants, probably on project financing requests that will flow out through the various organizations. They've got references on project management during the construction period, which to me is a construction cost, not a grant-based funding request, and also for management once the facility is up and running. Talked about the fact about there would have a request for property tax exemption, which is not clear. But I think it's kind of, frankly, in my view, premature to provide a funding position on a project that's not yet clearly defined, has not been, I mean, they're talking about having it done in 2 years, potentially. I think that's a dream. But at the same time, they were preparing a feasibility business plan that was supposed to be completed in August. I don't know if the municipality has seen that or not. That's identified here in the application. And I guess my comment is, I don't know that it's appropriate to provide a level of funding in this particular area, recognizing the other financial support that's been provided to for the organization at this time. None of it's going to flow back into a tax increase for general population. And as I said, the project they have a sense of what they want to do, but there's no detailed project plan. And they have no idea what the costs are going to be, at least I would think at this particular point in time. So I just think it's premature. I don't think it's baked at a point where we could legitimately provide, unless we want to just give them the cash and let them go to it. That's just my thought.
Comments?
But I could be wrong.
Well, I'm relieved that the idea is not to take these grants out of the small grants, because it was going to wipe it out and it was going to affect hundreds of volunteers in the community. So that's good.
So Joyce, can I just get last year's request, I believe, came in conjunction with those small community grants, and it was my recommendation to council that it not be approved at that point in time because of the large request, and that's where council encouraged us to work with Birch. I just want to give you a little bit more background. It might have been in the report, I can't remember. But they encourage staff to work with Birch to be able to apply for funding through the Bowen Island Community Foundation.
Just one point of addition, a comment too. I looked at their operational budget for future years and their financials, and they don't make any sense to me. Overall, they're projecting profits of $26,000 a year.
Well, then they
On
don't need
a-
operations management funding. Then they don't need funding for managing the
I wouldn't think so.
No.
So, and it's by all dates, like all we're doing is potentially giving them money to make us, to put into profit based on what's here. And I don't think that that's necessarily really the case when it comes down to it. I just don't think they're far enough along to know where they're gonna be. Like, it's all kind of out in sort of it's not tangible or known at this point in time. It really is kind of out there. So I think that just shows or reinforces a position of where they're not at yet in terms of financial support. And to expect people within the community to provide that level of support in tax, I think is not necessarily going to be very well received or is appropriate. Just me.
Do you guys want to deal with each one individually? I was going
That's
to
probably
ask that
best.
maybe,
Yeah.
well, I know you guys
Yeah,
are
have
still
comments on
discussing
the
it,
other
but
one,
can we have a recommendation on each one of these to council?
I think we talked about both and come back to the
Yeah,
recommendation.
well, on the Birch one, I guess my question was the timing. I mean, do they need the same amount for so many years?
Can I just noticed that on the report, it has 25,000 for each year, but on the
It's,
actual
it's a-
application, it's different?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's my
32,
mistake.
28,
Yeah.
24.
Doesn't make that
28.
much difference because the purpose is kind of the
Right.
same,
I
right?
just thought I'd point
It's
that
whatever
out.
we use, consultants kind of come out of the weeds on things like this to create funding requests on behalf of organizations, and there's all sorts of stuff that goes on.
Refresh my memory, Raj, did we give some money to Birch through another fund?
10,
10,000.
It was 10,
Yeah.
right?
adding, topping up the 15.
Right, so, okay.
So I think it's premature for a multi-year court funding grant.
For Birch.
For Birch. The two that have received the core funding grants are well-established organizations, and we were putting them through a very painful process to every single year. That's how this core funding policy came into being. And it was ridiculous. We were using volunteer time and paid staff time to apply
And their
over
time.
and over and over
Yeah, I can
again. So
imagine what that would be.
this is a completely different ball of wax as far as I'm concerned. There's, as much as I have faith in the people that are on the board and the vision and everything, there's no ability to say that it's going to be possible, other than we've got some progress. So I think making a decision on 4 years, it's just not on. If council wants to make a decision to give further assistance for year one so that they can get going, I wouldn't resist that. But to me, this is an inappropriate use of the 4-year plan.
I would kind of echo what Joyce said also. I think that even this research you're doing, they're doing research to find out what kind of housing you need. I mean, I can get 6 people together in the pub and buy a couple of drinks, and I'll tell you, I mean, give me the 15 grand.
No,
cover the
no,
bar
no,
tab.
that 15 grand's been met. We have to do those plans for the province.
I know, so but. I
Not
think
to,
it's a
nothing to
joke.
do with Birch.
Well, the province is screwing up housing anyway, so they might as well screw it up totally, so anyway, sorry.
So, I mean, I don't, all I'm saying is, I think that this particular program is an inappropriate program.
How would you, would you feel comfortable recommending the first year of this and see how the project goes?
Well, I think that the recommendation that I mean, you're more than welcome to make an additional recommendation. But this recommendation that's going to council is with respect to multi-year core funding. So you might just want to make a recommendation with respect to the multi-year core funding, however, council could look at other alternatives.
But they could come and ask us for that, ask council for just a year funding outside of this.
They only asked for 1 year, Rob?
No.
No,
they
sorry,
asked
maybe,
for 4.
no, what I was saying was they've asked for 4
For four.
years.
Oh.
And so that which is multi-year core funding, so what I'm hearing is that the finance committee will be recommending that the multi-year core funding application for the 4 years not be approved.
Okay.
And then it would be up to the finance
Do
committee.
we want to do a
make an
resolution on that particular
additional-
point and then address?
Does
Yeah.
this meet the
Subsequent business?
policy? Does their application meet the policy?
I believe they're
I mean, it says provide a service that would typically be provided by a municipality in other jurisdictions.
And so Robin has cited examples
Yeah,
of
she's
other
identified that.
municipalities who have
Oh,
provided that
okay.
service.
And it meets the objectives, business, yeah, it's not a business, so that's, yeah. Demonstrated track record of community service gets to Joyce's that they're a new fledgling. And financial administrative management, we really can't judge because they really haven't been along. Ongoing volunteerism and community support. Are they a registered nonprofit? They haven't got charitable status, have they?
They got a number here
Well,
on the
that's their
page.
Societies Act number, isn't
Is
it?
that what
They're
you're saying?
saying BC,
Yeah, their BC Societies
I don't
Act.
have to be
Yeah.
a charitable organization.
No, I know you don't have to, but,
Yeah.
And I don't believe they have charitable status, and that is why when the Bowen Found, they are a nonprofit organization.
yeah, and that's why we had to do the
But they
final
don't
3
have
for the
charitable, and that's
15.
why they had to go through us for the funding through the Bowen Island Foundation.
Yeah.
Raj, am I missing something? What is he wrong with this committee recommending that they be given a 1-year grant and what I would call a wait and see, to see
Oh.
how they do? Am I missing a procedural thing?
That's,
there?
No,
I would think that would be a different resolution, I think.
That's,
We need to
that's
deal
all I
with
was
this
getting,
one
yes.
here, so that's
I'm
as
trying
presented,
to
and then
get-
come up with a.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Come
make it
up with an
somewhat
alternative.
positive for them, that
Yeah,
Did you
rather
want,
than say we're turning it down, that we're really recommending that, maybe we say that, let me try these words, that multi-year core funding at this time is deemed not to be appropriate,
yeah.
but the finance committee does recommend the first year grant, something like that.
The grant for 2020. You're having-
I'm not supportive of that position.
But it,
You're at the zero base.
No, I mean, I'll put it this way, I don't think they were far enough along to even request a first-year grant position based on what their
So
presentation
a
puts
grant for
forward.
2020.
For 2020, I mean, I would not be adverse that we provide some seed funds for $10,000 again to keep them going, but I think that they have to do a ton of stuff to get to a point where they're even close to making an appropriate request.
so therefore, you're actually opposed to, back yours on the 4 year.
Yep.
And any other grant would have to be done based upon a council decision, based upon that update.
And that was one.
Yeah, yeah. Give us your update, bring us your update, let us look at it.
So-
4 year, not at this moment in time.
So can we agree that 4 years is not something we're willing to entertain at this point?
Wouldn't recommend
That's the
to council.
consensus, unless I hear a minority
Yeah.
reports, yeah.
So then the question is, how much do we agree with an amount for 2020?
Do we have to agree a dollar or figure, or could we ask them to make an application
Yeah.
with updated information?
I'm
well,
not
we
su-
never saw the 10,000 or 15 or whatever we gave, so I'm not sure why we have to see
I don't think.
an amount. I mean, it
Well,
seems
they've
to me
asked
it's
for
something,
an
well, we're
amount.
saying no.
We're saying no to the 4 years, but
Yeah.
they have asked for an amount for 2020.
Yeah, but we're saying that they're not even far enough along to justify those dollars. There's nothing, in my view, in the application that would support that position right now.
I guess that's 6 months away too, so council could consider, if they were told that and said council may consider something for 2020, but they need an updated report.
I mean, and really, the 10,000 they've received right now, which they just received recently, is for 2019. So you're right on that particular point. You really don't have to consider it until next year.
But
Or
the
or the
budget-
end of this year, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing the budget and Raj doesn't want to take it out of the community grants budget pot, then it's a separate standalone, and would we be recommending as our budget review, which we're gonna do in January, that they get 25,000?
Oh, I
Or
can't,
do we
I
want
can't say
more
that I would or wouldn't,
information?
because I don't know what
Okay,
they're
so then I
gonna
think we
present.
need to be more specific for them as to what information we're
Well-
wanting from them. Have you had experience in doing these kinds of things, Fred?
Not for
Would you-
years.
No, I was gonna say, we can loan you to them.
Yeah, but I used to deal with
Yeah.
stuff in different communities
Yeah.
where this stuff, it's all kind of airy-fairy, and everybody's got a good intent, but nobody's got an ability to follow through to actually complete the work that's required and to do it on a timely basis and in a comprehensive basis. And I think that it's just got to get farther along. Because
Can't we put an allowance in the budget, just so you got what I would call the budget, right? Provision?
You can't, well, you have to have a funding source for your provisions, so.
This is out of
so you-
taxes, it's-
You
Yeah.
do resolve part of the issue that I was coming to you
Yeah, go
with,
ahead.
which is by not approving the multi-year core funding, it takes the pressure on the tax increase. If you are going to recommend funding for just 1 year, then, I mean, there
Well, I
are
think-
options
Yeah, it's since
available
what
that I
people
can
are
consider with
saying, and
council.
people can kneecap me, that they're not supportive of the multi-year funding.
Yeah.
They may recommend to council something for 2020, but there's got to be some progress update before we're willing to recommend it, which gives them 6 months to get their act together.
Well,
Also,
and-
I'm thinking politically, that just sounds better than saying no. It
Yeah,
just
and I
seems to
and I
me,
guess
like,
the other issue is, I haven't had time to wade through this, to go look at what Peachland and these other things that they've suggested.
you know, they're quite varied, the proposals they use as comparisons and the types of
Yeah, but do
communities.
they have dollars in them?
No.
No, and that's what I'm
There's no,
saying.
well, other than the fact that they received funding, the only one that actually put money
Yeah.
in according to this was Peachland. But again, the point that you raised is we
Yeah.
provided property that has a value.
huge.
Yeah,
So Peachland put in 1.98, that's what they projected, but we've already put in 1.4 or whatever it is.
Yeah, at least $1 million.
Anyway, just, I think we're not there.
Hopefully we got a hook on the lease too, that they don't move dirt in a certain time period, a lease is
Yeah,
canceled.
yeah.
We have a hook in it?
But
Okay.
again, their financials to me don't make sense as presented as well. Don't support the requests, which are
Brad, just,
kind
I
of
think
showing
you got a
profits.
sense of how would you want to handle this for budget then? I mean,
I think what I would suggest then is basically that the finance committee recommend to council that multi-year core funding application not be approved at this time.
Right.
And then from what I heard as the second part of the resolution, that the finance committee recommends to council that further information such as, and I'm not exactly sure what
We
the
could call it a
specifics are,
progress
be
report or something like
requested
that,
from
to make it
Birch
generic.
before considering, further requests for funding.
So project status update.
Yeah.
Well, they were supposed to have completed a fairly, where is it here? A feasibility study business plan was supposed to be completed August of 2019. That's in their request for funding, which I assume
Yeah, when
nobody
was
nobody
That's
has.
come
when was
What's
this
the date of
done?
this?
I don't know when this arrived, but,
They were due at the end of July. July 31st.
so they were within 30 days going to have completed this project, which, good luck with
I
that.
think if nothing else, that's another reason for not approving this time, and they committed to do that and didn't come forth.
And to be fair to them, I mean, there was a July 31st deadline, so they got it in, so that's okay. Maybe the deadline is the problem,
Could be.
you know?
But as I said, I don't think the supporting information is there, so it just doesn't reconcile.
Are we okay with Rod's suggestion there? So again, we're suggesting first part, we're turning down the multi-year funding.
Yeah.
The second part is we're recommending to council that they request a progress report
including their business plan, we might want to put that in there.
Yeah, it specifies, as I said, feasibility study / business plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A full written plan
Yeah,
is
so
supposed to
the
be
progress
completed.
report would include that to council before council approves any further funding. Everybody warm and fuzzy on that? Can we take a word or two?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Steph, you got something like that? So
Yeah,
let's.
did you want,
Go ahead, Steph.
want to include something about the tax in a whereas, like whereas funding this would cause a tax increase?
I think it should be a separate resolution, in my view.
Two separate,
Yeah, two separate ones. One, we turned down the multi-year funding,
Yeah.
and second
One
of
is-
all,
And we're proposing, we're
But we don't
actually
need a
providing this
whereas.
recommendation to council, right?
right,
Yeah,
So it's a completely separate thing, yeah.
two
yeah,
separate ones.
but no whereas that we're.
no.
So one resolution is the committee recommend the
never did
council
that.
not award multi-year core funding to Bowen Island Resilient Housing.
Yeah.
At this time, put it at this time, just to keep everybody warm and fuzzy.
For 2020 to 2024, because that was the
Yeah.
period
Yeah.
that has been requested.
Okay.
Okay, second resolution.
Do you want to vote on that one?
2020 to 2022.
All those in favor of the first one, by the way?
Yeah.
We're good? All right, that one's done. The second one smells something like,
That the committee recommend the council request a progress status update from Bowen Island Resilient Community Housing before further funding is.
yeah, just maybe put including
A feasibility study, business plan,
business plan.
which,
Including a
I
feasibility-
mean, really, there's no detail here about the scope of the project, other than they know where it is and how many
And business
units,
plan?
And business plan before additional funding is approved.
or is considered.
Consider.
Consider, better word.
Further grant funding is
Do
considered.
you want to say like a
Consider,
one
consider is
year?
better than
Yeah, because they're still
approved.
within the current period, so, of the current funding, so.
Do you want to say before further funding for 2020?
So I'm really confused. Has anybody looked
Additional
at this,
requests for funding or
the
considered.
page
Yeah.
that's got
Yeah, I would put a
in-kind
date on it.
contributions on it?
Additional
Microsoft
requests.
365 nonprofit membership,
Yeah.
it's $21,600 worth of in-kind contribution.
I see the executive director getting $6,700 a year, that's more than, the stress people get. You're in the
Yeah.
wrong racket, Michael.
Yeah, and
But he only goes to 4 meetings a year, that's all he has to do, so that's $3,200.
but it's a little bit, yeah,
And he gets all his expenses paid when he goes.
if I charge expenses, which I
Well, I don't know why you wouldn't.
don't, because you can't call them rats and then give them a bill.
Okay, we good? All those in favor of that motion?
Yes.
We're good?
You're all good, yeah.
Okay. Tourism,
That was tough, wasn't it?
tourism. General comments on this one?
It's replacing a service agreement, so I still do not understand why they don't want a 2-year service agreement rather than this core funding.
I think they would
It's the same
settle.
thing.
I think they would settle for a service agreement. What they're trying to do is they have an amount and they came back every year. The
Yeah.
service they provide for those not familiar, the service they provide is to really marshal and provide all the guidance and the people down there when they come off the ferries in the peak times, so they don't all come straight into the library and just absolutely crowd it out there. So they can direct people to the trails and everything else. What they're looking for is a little bit of continuity of revenue, because a lot of it goes in salaries or part-time wages, so they can just get on with their lives without having to go through this every year. If there was I thought it was more of a service agreement, to tell you the truth, because there is an existing service agreement. So
Yeah.
we have an existing, and I thought
And
we were
it's
just
been an
expanding.
annual one,
Yes,
so
and
my question is, why don't we just keep that and make it a 2-year service agreement? Why are we
were
doing
going to
core
increase.
grants?
I think we're going to increase the amount on the original service
But you
agreement.
can do that in a service agreement.
They would have no, all they're looking for is not have to go through this.
No, they insisted they wanted to be applying under community core grants,
Well,
and
they'd
I
like-
have no idea why.
4
Makes no
years
sense.
third funded.
Maybe
That's why they won't do it.
that's.
They've only asked for 2 years.
They only asked for 2 years, they didn't
They
ask
did?
for 4
Yeah,
years.
they've only
Oh, I'm
asked
sorry.
for 2 years, and they've already got an agreement for
Okay,
one.
well, I don't know.
So just rewrite the agreement and change the amount for,
If I was them, just give me the check, I'm happy, call it
Yeah.
whatever you
Yeah.
want. you
Yeah,
know?
actually, I think you've nailed it, to be honest. Would you, I'd ask you to just repeat that, because I think you're right. I think you're
well,
right.
I said that to them when they were having the meeting with you and Kathy and Hope. I said, they were rewriting the 2019 agreement, and I said, just make it for 3 years.
Yeah, that
And-
actually would make sense
And
because
you could have a changing amount for 3 years, or you could
Yeah.
say the
Yeah.
amount to
Yeah,
be.
I think Allison
I
is
think
close to.
this is
Go ahead,
the
Ed.
only agreement for service that we have in the organization, and I think
But it's the way it's done in most communities.
what I was just gonna say was, by approving a multi-year core funding, agreement for them, puts them on the same, they're providing the same type of service that the Museum and Archives does, that the Arts
But they still
Council
have to do a
does, I believe.
service agreement.
So, we would still have a service
Yeah,
agreement with them
so-
if we provided the
Yeah.
funding, but we would have them in the same pot,
Okay, so
the
from
same
your
funding
perspective,
pot,
you
and
want
so
them
from
in
my
the-
perspective,
okay.
I think it makes sense
Okay.
to have them,
question answered.
Okay.
to have
Good
it
Carol.
here, rather
What
than,
do you-
it's kind of an outlier when it sits in our
Oh,
operating
But
okay.
it's
budget.
still gonna be a 2-year agreement, just so.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
I actually, it was an oversight on my part, I thought it was a request for 4 years, I'm not sure why they only.
Yeah, I didn't pick it up when I read it, I have to say.
I didn't
I
pick
just
up on
saw
that.
it too. But I do have a comment about the funding level that's requested
Yeah.
and what they're proposing to do. I think they've done a marvelous job for the last couple of years that have seen, 50% increases in tourist traffic in the summer months. I think an intent to expand it to a 12-month operation is not going to produce, or from a, I'll call it economic value, so that I don't know that that's going to improve things in terms of the community. I don't think people standing up by the ferry in November, walking off the ferry is going to help them
Or
very much.
January.
Or January.
I don't know they intend to do that.
Yeah, well, they're going to
Well, they
open
want-
75 hours a month is their initial proposal over the course of the winter. But they're also looking for funding to expand, a big part of it, just so we're underlined. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'll find her. But they're looking for funding, they're going to develop a destination management strategy.
Yeah,
So part of the funding, I believe, is to assist with that particular process. But I think, and we also, the municipality provides no-charge use of the visitor center itself, the cottage that they have. So there already is a level of funding. So it's been around 20,000 plus use of the cottage. I think the current program has done its job. I don't see that expanded services over the winter months are worth the additional $18,000 to $24,000 investment per year.
okay, what
That's being
page is the
proposed.
hours on?
And I think that, to me, that doesn't make sense. I mean, it's not like people are going to come over here to go skiing up on Mount Gardner. And, the
You never
level
know
of
when
traffic,
climate change.
the level of traffic in winter months, I mean, I don't want to be anecdotal, but you can always see it's already dropping now. So I don't see that this being open during the course of the winter months is going to produce a result. Recognizing they also put an element of economic development within their request for funding, whereas the municipality is hiring an economic development officer as well. So to me, that's a duplication of service and a crossover, and I think that an economic development officer on Bowen would be more than capable of dealing with any of that flow that would occur over the course of winter that's related to business
Well,
development.
no, they're specific, and they're doing an economic development work plan. They would not be down, and their job description does not include manning the visitor center. The economic development person that's.
No, I'm not suggesting that would be open at all. I
Oh,
don't
okay,
think it's
but I
necessary.
thought you
I'm just
said that
saying
they
that
could
business
cover off the
inquiries made of the
75 hours.
municipality would be addressed by the economic development
Oh.
officer.
Yeah,
Some people aren't going to go wandering into that center inquiring about that in winter. And
But-
I think that, as I said, I think they're to be recognized for the success of what they've achieved on basically a 6-month operation, which would, in my view, continue appropriately as a 6-month operation in the future. Recognizing that there's also an economic development officer position coming to the municipality, which would be a full-time job. So we'll have 12-month coverage on that particular
It's
situation.
a half-time job for a year.
Okay, for a
2
year.
years.
For 2 years.
For 2 years, that's
2
pretty
yeah.
good.
A plan.
So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, if we look at, again, I don't think we want to have funding that's going to flow back to the general population under their taxes under this program, because not everybody benefits from it. And at the same time, those businesses that have seen their volumes double and triple in the last 2 years, if they're interested in funding something like that, to me that would be making more sense than having the general population fund it. It's kind of controversial. It's controversial with a lot of people anyway in terms of the flow of visitors over different times of the year. So I just think I would suggest that I'm supportive of current levels of funding, but not to increase funding. Is my comment.
Okay, Joyce?
I'm kind of there too, maybe for a slightly different reason. I mean, when the words destination, tourism are used, there's grant money that's available for destination sites if you've got a plan in place. And to me, that's part of probably what's going on here. But I believe that the economic development person should be looking at the entire scope of economic development for the island, including tourism.
Yes, and she will.
So then the question to my mind is, from an economic development standpoint, is it to our advantage to be identified as a destination site or not? I mean, from a tourism's perspective, I understand, but in terms of an economic development for the island's perspective, is that what we want? Can we cope with that? You know, all of those questions around that. So it's kind of the cart before the horse as far as I'm concerned. It seems to me that this kind of level of funding that they're looking for, if the economic development officer suggests that that's something that we really need for tourism, then we look at it at that point. I would like to see what is developed from the planning perspective before we start, you know, nurturing yet more action around tourism, because it has been a challenge for many people and many businesses, the level of tourism we've had. I think it's really healthy, but how sustainable is it is a question. And I think the economic development officer and developing the plan will answer some of those questions.
A little bit in Joyce's camp too. I think if you look at
point.
what's the economic development individual going to add to the economy? We're not going to bring a steel mill or a refinery to Bowen Island. And tourism is a big part of the economic sustainability of this community. You ask them, most of the people, you know, down around the cove, they don't make it in the summertime, they're going to starve to death. You know, it's because they're tourists. You know?
Yep.
So tourism, whether they like it or not, you can cross off steel mills and oil refineries, but you got to put tourism on the list. You know? Well, look at Whistler. I mean, if you said to Whistler, does tourism have anything to do with your economic development in Whistler? They're going to say, are you kidding me?
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's all they got.
So are
So
you
what do you want to do?
thinking
What do you want to do with this
to leave it
thing
at the
then,
same
Phil?
level, but agree to the 2-year funding? But at the same level as year one? I mean, like it was 15, like, what?
Would you be okay with that and encourage a greater relationship with the economic development person? Or?
If you would do that at least, it would give
Well, I'm
them
good
some
with that.
time, it
Yeah.
would give them some time to provide people to actually boots on the ground there in the summertime, which at least it could cover off
I
like
think
a
we need to
base
support
concern.
Totally,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah, that would be
And I
fair.
would even say, you know, a marginal increase to reflect cost of living or whatever else, you know, we
How much
do,
did they
that's
get this
okay.
year?
But-
Actually, they demonstrated to council that they needed 20,000, there hadn't been
It was
any
15 and
to
5,
meet
right?
their operating
Yeah.
expenses, so.
So,
I just-
I'm
so
good with that.
15 was, it had
20,
been 15 for many, many, many years.
yeah, I'm good with
So
this.
we feel comfortable recommending
20?
20 and
for
a
2
2-year
years?
deal and,
Yeah.
and also recommend there's some synergies possible, the economic development officer, whatever you want to call it.
Excuse me, they have a new chair. I think it's rather like that they come back to us in 2 years' time and say, look, we've got a new group, we've had a chance to, here's our plan. We're kind of further ahead than we were in 2018 and 2019 with our thinking.
Mhm.
This is the scoop. council, let's have a look at it, but if you could at least give them that 20,000.
That's fine.
2 years?
That,
I'm proposing that, yeah.
that would
Okay.
give them, I don't want to see.
We're
them-
talking about 20 for 2 years, Michael.
20
Yeah.
for each year.
So
For each year.
Yes.
So Fred moved that, and Mike will
I'll second
second that.
Yep,
All those in favor?
yeah, mine was the increase, not
The
the
core
base.
funding.
Well, I read it like that.
20,000 per
Recommend the
year.
council award a multi-year core funding to tourism Bill and for $25,000 per year for 2 years.
Did we talk about 20 or
I think
25?
we said
20.
27.
Yeah, 20.
Said,
And that the committee recommend that GBI work closely with the economic development officer in its development of a plan.
Yeah.
Perfect, everybody okay? All those in favor, that got passed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are we done?
Okay, is there anything else on the open agenda, other than reading the bottom of page 2, which gives us a reason to go to a closed meeting?
You want me to read that?
Everybody can read. Everybody read that? That's
Well,
why
no,
I read.
we're being
I'll read
video.
it.
Oh, you gotta read that thing?
Sure, that the Finance Committee resolved to move to a closed meeting pursuant to Section 90, bracket 1, bracket K of the Community Charter, 90, bracket 1. A part of a council meeting may be closed for the public if the subject matter being considered relates to or is one